Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be probably giving 1 or 2 seconds more for others to chime in as well. Okay, I think we can start with that. Good morning, everyone, and very warm welcome to today's webinar, Financing Carbon Capture and Storage in Central and Eastern Europe, Strategies for Cost-Effective Deployment. I'm Tamara Lagurashvili, Director of Central and Eastern Europe at Clinia Task Force. For those of you who might be joining our webinar for the first time or have not heard about CATF, we're a global climate organization working to scale up climate protecting technologies and solutions like the one that we are talking today. We are working globally in the US, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and working at the intersection of business policy and the narrative change. As countries in Central and Eastern Europe are really gearing towards the energy security and decarbonization perspective, from them deliberating the path for industrial decarbonization is incredibly important. I think by end of this year, if we are scanning what are some of the keywords emerging this year, obviously retaining industrial competitiveness and industrial decarbonization will emerge as the winners. With the fiscal constraints, the countries have paramount challenge to balance many trade-offs, especially when the defense is so much high on their agenda. In the industrial decarbonization space, with many other tools available at their disposal, CCS is also as emerging as a key solution in the decarbonization toolbox. And we are really seeing some really positive steps along the way. And I think our panelists will be touching some of the positive examples across the region. However, we also see that we are lacking credible business case and enabling regulatory framework that actually will incentivize various investors to come and invest in the first of a kind project, which is so critical for de-risking those quite important investments. So this webinar today, we have roughly 1 hour. We have a very exciting report launch authored by my wonderful colleague, Cody Rossi. And at this report is really looking at some of the pragmatic, tangible, and practical solutions for deploying carbon capture and storage at cost in CE region. And what I mean at cost, obviously, is understanding the contextual challenges that CE countries are facing that might be different from other parts of Europe. Aging infrastructure and really limited fiscal space sometimes gives additional headache to the decision makers about which technologies to invest in. The brief also explores how the national policymakers should collaborate with the project developers in order to reduce the funding costs by primarily exploring and investing in the CO2 domestic storage capacity and tapping into EU and national funds. And of course, because a lot of CCS projects will be not only limited to the remits of the national boundaries, but they will be cross-border projects, also understanding how this collaboration across the region can enable deployment at cost will be something that we will be exploring today. To walk you through a run of show, as I mentioned, we have roughly 1 hour. We will first kick off by a short presentation of the report finding delivered by Cody Rossi, Euro Policy Manager of Carbon Capture at Clinia Task Force, and then we'll be diving deep into the panel discussion. We have roughly 35 minutes for that. And for the panel discussion, we will be joined by a stellar panel from the diversity of backgrounds and sectors. So let me introduce them one by one. Yanis Volberts, Manager Baltics at Bellona. Welcome, Yanis. Agnieszka Garbacz, Public Affairs, Social Impact, and ERM Manager, Cemex Polska. Welcome, Agnieszka. Beric Bulak, Associate Climate Strategy and Delivery, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Welcome, Berich, and thank you very much for joining. And Pavel Zamyslitsky, Director at Climate Protection Policy Department, Ministry of the Environment of the Czech Republic. Thank you very much, Pavel, for joining. I wish all of you a
Morning.
wonderful webinar. And back to you now, Cody.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and welcome everyone to our webinar. It's very nice to see you all, and thank you to the panelists as well for joining us today for this discussion. I'm just going to go through our findings of our policy brief, which should set us up for a fruitful discussion. Get this to share. So what we tried to look at in this latest policy brief, funding carbon capture and storage in Central and Eastern Europe, which was released on the 16th of September, is we tried to dig into the need for CCS, first of all, but then how do we actually kind of make it happen? And what we have found from just scoping out the different emission sectors in the region is that CE does have quite a lot of industrial emissions. You can see from this map that they're primarily clustered in just 4 sectors, with most countries having a significant amount of a cement and lime industry, but also on the right, you can see there the primary emitting industry in each country. With the new push for a clean industrial deal and decarbonisation across Europe, we can see that decarbonising these heavy industries is going to be very important for the future competitiveness of industry in the region. What we have also found is that there is currently a geographical disparity in how much CO2 storage is being developed across the region. On the figure to the right, what you can see is the current CO2 storage projects, as well as the licenses that have been given out and the scale by which they are to inject CO2. CO2 storage is needed to unlock CCS developments because it provides the end of the value chain for CCS projects. And unfortunately, at the moment, right now, we can see that there is not really much CO2 storage being developed in Central and Eastern Europe. What we do know is that we will need almost 500 million tons of CO2 storage annually across Europe, and that's from the European Scientific Advisory Board. The Commission has recognized this and has set a 50 million ton storage target by 2030 on obligated oil and gas producers from across Europe. Some of these countries host large obligated entities, such as Orlen in Poland or in Romania, which also have sizable obligations. The storage potential is there in Central and Eastern Europe, but right now only 1.5% of EU storage is planned there. You can see the small circles reflecting that in Hungary and Croatia. Right now, early projects, which are proposed in Central and Eastern Europe, mostly plan to export their CO2 to the North Sea. This would reflect higher transport and storage costs, which we'll get to in the next slide. What we decided to do is to look at what happens if this export-only model of CO2 storage to the North Sea or other locations was used. What we did is we looked at 2 different scenarios, one by which only exporting is the option, which is the limited storage scenario. And then we also looked at what if we could develop more CO2 storage in the areas where there is potential. So domestic storage, and we call that the widespread storage. For this analysis, what we did is we took a country average of the whole value chain costs of carbon capture and storage, and then looked at that compared to an ETS trajectory, which rose up to €194 a ton in 2035. What we did find is that without domestic CO2 storage, it is still not competitive to develop CCS in 2030 in all CE countries. That's because the overall costs, excluding the costs of capital, but just the costs of running the CCS value chain from transport, storage, and capture, was still higher than the ETS price. If domestic CO2 storage is available in 2030, even in a few locations, in each of the countries, what you do find then is that CCS becomes competitive much earlier with the ETS price, and OPEX savings are then realized. Looking further into the future, you do see with an ETS price trajectory, as shown in the bottom of the slide, that CCS does still make sense to deploy to avoid these carbon prices. Of course, I must say, It depends on the location of the emitter. It depends on the processes of the specific industry site. So this is very much just to give you a picture of what the overall assessment looks like in the region. It will, of course, vary based on specific sites. But what you do find in 2035, if you have widespread CO2 storage available in the region using those domestic CO2 storage sites, the savings add up and are much larger. So up to €96 a ton of CO2 versus paying the ETS price. So if we want to be able to get these projects off the ground, what we have found is that really at the moment the capital required to invest in these projects is quite large. And the ETS is currently too low and too volatile to cover the whole value chain on its own. There's also an avoided cost. So there is kind of, there's not really much of a benefit in developing CCS if it is cheaper to pay the ETS price. That being said, the ETS price is projected to rise, as we've said, but it's hard to make decisions based upon something that is uncertain and volatile. We've seen that projects haven't advanced in the past due to a lack of funding support and other reasons as well. So what we do call for is carbon contracts for difference, which can cover the OPEX gap between CCS cost and ETS price. And these phase out then as well once CCS is competitive with the ETS price, depending on how you set it up. CapEx support is also extremely important to get these projects off the ground. So those could be grants, concessional loans, equity injections to enable FID, but could also cover other things such as studies or scoping studies for geological storage sites. What we found that works, and we'll get into the case studies in a moment, is that a blend of EU and national funds, as well as private capital, really unlocked these full CCS value chains in the projects that we see that have already progressed. So, what is a CCFD? Well, in in a kind of easy way to say it is a subsidy that declines and phases out over time when the strike price is set to be the ETS, and if the carbon price is higher than what the project costs, the strike price is, then the project pays. Before that, the government pays, and the idea is that this balances out. But that depends on how you set that up. But either way, what we do find is that CCFDs provide the long-term revenue certainty by bridging that cost gap. And that enables investment in these early stage projects. How it does that is by de-risking them and providing a stable financial framework that supports the bankability. If we have onshore storage, that then reduces the costs of the whole value chain. So it would be less of a CCFD needed until the ETS comes in at a higher price. Well, we did look at our different projects that have advanced and use these kind of methods to actually take final investment decision. And those are Porthos and Northern Lights. And they're both large enough, 2.5 million tons CO2 a year for Porthos, and phase one of Northern Lights is 1.5 million tons. This is just a little guide here through what actually unlocked these projects. So if we look at Porthos, we had EU funding coming in to fund the front end engineering designs and early development. You then had a CCFD by the Dutch government for project customers, which de-risked the demand. And a state guarantee covered 80% of pre-investment risk when there were legal challenges against the development of the project. A state loan, as well as the participation of state-owned entities, allowed for lower returns in order to meet the climate goals. For Northern Lights, you also saw a large amount of de-risking by the state. So the state covered around 75% of CAPEX and 10 years of OPEX support for the capture installations. The contracts as well that were secured early on helped de-risk by allowing for volume to be locked in. And then that snowball effect triggered phase two of the project, which is a large scale up. Both of these projects leverage EU funding instruments as well as national government instruments. Right now, the picture is that it is very competitive to get into the Innovation Fund, which can help fund some of these capture installations. It's quite oversubscribed. But there were large sums of money available to fund decarbonization projects such as CCS. And one of those is the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which Croatia used to advocate for a project, or to fund a project, sorry. So what we can see here is that there is large amounts of funding available, such as the Connecting Europe facility, and there are forthcoming funding instruments under the Clean Industrial Deal, the Industrial Decarbonisation Bank, as well as using financial institutions, clean tech guarantee from the European Investment Bank. So really what's this to say is just that there are large amounts of EU funding that can be blended with national funding instruments under the state aid guidelines. And this can also help to get projects off the ground, as we've seen with the two projects that did progress. Financial institutions and green bonds can also play a critical role in complementing EU funding. The European Investment Bank provides loans, equities, and guarantees to de-risk projects, while the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development also does these loans, equity guarantees. We have seen certain companies invest now with green bonds, which lowers their interest, provides a greenium, and we've seen strong investor demand for those. For example, Heidelberg and Cemex, both in the billions for their green bond offerings. But all of this funding landscape is quite complicated to navigate. So with government coordination between the project developers as well as national governments, what you could see is a more effective accessing of these financing and funding instruments. So the EU funds the private capital. State coordination will be very important for this. Traditionally, what we've seen is that governments are a supervisor, which sets the rules and liability frameworks, such as transposing the EU CO2 directive. They can be an instigator, such as targeting interventions with temporary subsidies, such as the SDE++ in the Netherlands, or they can take a direct role in owning infrastructure, such as in Denmark, where they own a stake of the CO2 storage sites. But what we see is a need for a new government role that can help cut costs, unlock funds, and accelerate CCS, and that is the role of the coordinator. And what would the coordinator do? Well, essentially to help the development by strategic clustering, so shared CO2 transport and storage to cut costs and risks, unlock this EU funding that's available using national CCS strategies and one-stop shops to enable the Innovation Fund, Clean Energy Facility accessing these funding. Also to allow for regional collaboration when there's a cross-border CO2 transport, and to build administrative capacity, permitting know-how, and speed up approval. So in sum, CCS is essential. It's a viable path for decarbonising hard-to-abate industries. Competitiveness is at risk due to the rising EU ETS prices, could trigger deindustrialization without deployment of CCS where it's needed. This is especially in light of other countries in Western Europe deploying CCS. Domestic storage cuts costs. We've seen that it reduces the transport and storage expenses by up to half. And this financing and funding gap really does matter. The high CapEx and OpEx price and the ETS price is still not yet sufficient. As I went through, government should act as a coordinator to align actors, cluster emitters, streamline permitting, and secure funding. And blended finance and funding is really needed, combining the EU's funding available with national schemes and private capital. And de-risking as well. Carbon contracts for difference, grants, guarantees, and concessional loans can help bring projects to final investment decision. Cluster-based approaches work. Shared transport and storage hubs lower the overall costs of all the emitters and accelerate rollout. What we do need now is momentum. Past efforts show stronger support is needed. New initiatives now open fresh opportunities for emitters and projects to really get into the green with these projects. Thank you very much, and look forward to your questions in the chat. So I'll now call the panelists onto the webinar if you want to put on your cameras. Thank you so much. Great. And so thank you all again for joining us here today. Pavel, I would like to start with you, with your role in the Czech government. And given that we've been talking a little bit here about the role of the state in coordinating projects and really getting things off the ground and some of these early movers, what role do you see for government policy in driving CCS developments? Are there any challenges or lessons learned from your own work on CCS?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks for everybody. Yeah, briefly to tell you where we are in the Czech Republic in terms of the development of CCUS, because We have some development in the couple of weeks, couple of months this year, because there are two documents I would like to highlight. The first is the National Energy and Climate Plan that we submitted to the European Commission and finalized. So we are planning to fully decarbonize our electricity system by 2033, and then to make further steps to be climate neutral by 2050. So in the NECP, we have identified that probably we will need around 7 million of CO2 to be stored or used by 2050 annually. So there is definitely room for CCUS, and therefore we submitted the national CCUS strategy, which was approved by the government in March this year. So further identifying the needs and possibilities for different industrial sectors in the Czech Republic. So just to briefly mention, we have identified the need to store or use 1.5 million from cement and lime, then up to 3 million from steel and iron production, and there is something between half and 2 million from energy sector, especially waste incineration or natural gas combustion. So roughly the need from the Czech industry and energy sectors is between 6 and 16 million ton of CO2 annually by 2050. So I think the first thing which was important, or first step which was important, was to create a CCUS platform. So the national platform, which is the industrial companies are joining, industrial sectors, academia, Czech Geological Survey, and other institutions, including ministries. And the platform is used to sum up available information, try to identify and remove barriers, including, for instance, for CO2 transport. The one from the main task is to prepare something like a map, which will be developed to find the sources of CO2, the main industrial sources, and try to explore possibilities how to create an infrastructure for CO2 transport. Another important task is to discuss with neighboring countries like Germany, Poland, Austria, Slovakia about potential cooperation in infrastructure, because we have mapped that in the Czech Republic we have capacity to store theoretically 1.2 gigaton of CO2, but it's really theoretical, and we need to further explore possibilities for domestic CO2 storage capacities. But more likely, we would use some common EU project and storage in North Sea. So it's another possibility. And as well, we need to look at the funding options. I would say it's absolutely correct, the list of possibilities you mentioned, including the innovation fund, the modernization fund, and other ETS sources, and of course the supporting schemes. But rather after 2030, because until 2030, I see let's say not so big appetite from industrial companies. It's because of CO2 price, because of other uncertain issues. Um, and another issue is, I mentioned the removing the barriers, like to define the legal implementation of EU regulation, which is saying for instance, how the financial security of CO2 storage operators should look like, because this is, for instance, one issue which is unresolved and which is waiting for further work. So I would stop, and then would be eager to discuss with others or responding to questions.
Thank you, Pavel. That's a very good overview. And it's good to see movement in Czechia. Let's move to Yanis now. Given that we've seen how certain countries are recognizing now that CCS is needed, such as Czechia, how do you see CCS fitting within the broader decarbonization portfolio for the region, particularly alongside renewables and energy efficiency?
Thank you, Cody, for the question and for the great presentation, and the whole Clean Air Task Force team for a very insightful report with very relevant metrics and so on. Coming back to your question, on a wider option of technical solutions, such as you mentioned, electrification, energy efficiency, we see that CCS as a vital solution primarily for process emissions. And basically emissions that cannot be otherwise avoided. And we have created with E3G CCS ladder that basically provides like a conversation starter for which sectors should be primarily supported with public funding. And of course, each geography, each sector has to be looked carefully individually, but that is really as a framework how authorities, for example, can start looking when there are multiple companies that strive for competitive advantage with CCS when the ETS price rises. At some point, government will need to prioritize sectors that would potentially receive some government funding. And for that reason, we have created the CCS ladder. Now some time has passed, and we are now creating on the revised second version of that ladder. So that is one thing that, of course, everything that can be electrified must be electrified. Everything that can be improved was circularity measures and other efficiency should be done. But for hard to abate industries, like mentioned by Pavel, cement, steel, there is just so much you can do, and for that part that you cannot abate otherwise, CCS is ready, scalable solution that must be deployed.
Thank you, Yanis. And it's great initiative that you've done. I'm glad to hear that it's being updated as well, the CCS ladder. At the top of the CCS ladder, we have cement in a wet or dry cement kiln in the near term, and then other options as well. Lime and cement was always at the top of the need for CCS. So Agnieszka, how do you see CCS kind of being developed in your sector? How do we ensure the competitiveness of the cement sector in CE, and how can we make CCS succeed for your sector?
Thank you for having me, Cody, today at this webinar. CCS is the only way to reach the neutrality, climate neutrality at the cement sector, and because of the process emissions. Cement sector is supporting the EU climate goals. However, we do need support on the way to achieve it. And as you mentioned, the main issue at the moment is competitiveness of the sector, as we face few challenges at the moment with cement sector, at the cement sector. First of all, this is it's high energy prices, and I can tell only by the Polish market, where we have the most expensive energy in EU. And it's important at the moment with the cement production, but also it might be even more important with the CCS the CCS deployment, where we need not only energy, but we need green energy. And the second challenge is CO2 costs and the CO2 allowances after 2034, where we won't be able to have it. So the cost of CO2 will also influence the competitiveness of the sector. And at the moment, the industry is facing import challenges. And in Poland, we might have 1 million tons import from Ukraine this year, according to forecasts. But in Western Europe, for example, in the UK, over 30% of cement is imported from the outside of the EU, and the production there is at the moment lower than in 1950. So that shows where the sector is at the moment. And regarding the CCUS, the main issue for us, for our sector, but I guess for other sectors as well, is the access to the funding. And this is without the support from EU or the governments, we won't be able to proceed with the projects, as the cost of OPEX and CAPEX are very high. And we would look forward to the risking of this investment. So I think I'm echoing here your key findings from the report. And what else we need? We need clear and credible regulatory framework. So the companies could make investment decisions based on the framework, on the legal framework that would support the business case. And for example, in Poland, we still wait for the CCS strategy. And at the moment, we're also waiting for the localization regulation, which is key for the business decisions regarding the projects. So I would say that the risking of the investment, CCFDs, and credible, clear regulatory framework would be the most important issues for us to deploy CCS projects.
Thank you, Agnes. Kind of fully agree with those mechanisms, very needed to get projects going. With that, maybe we could talk a little bit about how do we get finance going to these projects. And so, Merit, are there specific financing kind of structures or funding structures that you consider most effective for reducing risk in, risk-heavy projects from the financial side, such as CCS investments in these emerging markets, such as Central and Eastern Europe?
Yes, thank you, Cody. From EBRD's perspective, we believe the most effective way we see to reduce risk is through blended and layered financing structures. What that means in practice is bringing together EU and national grant instruments like Innovation Funds, CEF, PSI, and combining them with multilateral and private finance. It's not just one source on its own. It's about stacking these different sources together and make the projects bankable. Sorry. Another crucial element we believe is public-private risk sharing. Concessional finance plays a really important role in de-risking this first wave of projects, but it's not just about putting the money on the table. Multilateral banks like EBRD can provide donor-funded technical support for early-stage projects, and also we can support regulatory reforms The key point in here is we need to be engaged in the project cycle at early stages to be able to have an impact. And when we talk about business models, what really matters is if they are clear and investable. There are some examples, for example, capacity-based models. One example, here revenues are secured through long-term contracts for storage and transport capacity, so there are predictable cash flows. Another example is auction-based approach, where competitive bidding allocates carbon price guarantees to the lowest cost projects. Both give visibility, these examples give visibility on future revenues and provide the stability that private capital is looking for. We also see a lot of potential in hub-based models, especially in this region. By pooling transport and storage infrastructure across multiple emitters, we believe that we can reduce counterparty and volume risk, and at the same time, we can create economies of scale that will make the projects more attractive to the investors. And finally, we shouldn't underestimate the role of guarantees and insurance mechanisms. Tools like partial risk guarantees and carbon price floors are critical. Guarantees protect investors from risks like construction delays or early underperformance, where carbon price floors ensure the value of avoided emissions never drops too low. So together, they cut the revenue uncertainty and give sponsors and financiers the confidence to invest. So in short, to summarize, the EBRD's role is to really combine its own financing with donor-funded technical cooperation, concessional resources, and co-financing with commercial banks. So in that way, we believe that private capital can be mobilized at scale and have de-risk all these important first early mover projects.
Thank you, Marge. That's very, very useful information, I'm sure, to any projects looking to get off the ground. And so, Pavel, coming back to kind of the idea of a project within Czechia, are there any specific plans beyond what you have outlined, or if you would like to go into more detail into some of the government plans you've outlined to support CCS projects in Czechia?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Of course, that I summarized what we are planning to do, especially in terms of to create infrastructure, to create practical plans for individual sectors and individual companies, and let's say give a clarity in terms of infrastructure and legal system. In terms of funding, I think that we need to make some further steps. In a past, we have one pilot project called CCS Moravia. It is the project proposal by MND, what is the gas storage company, and Heidelberg as a cement company. The project was submitted and I think received the step seal under the Innovation Fund, but was not, say, financially awarded. So it's the one proposal which we are planning to further collaborate. And as well, there are some other plans. The chemical industry, especially interested in CO2 not only storage but utilization. But I think in that area we need to have more developed legislation in order to give a assurance that there is a let's say CO2 usage which is fine in terms of the ETS regulation. So it means that it has sense that you save the CO2 allowances if you provide sufficient guarantees and clarity in terms of the utilization of CO2. So there is a interest from different sectors and different companies, but in coming weeks and months, we would like to work rather on let's say infrastructure and readiness to create some first pilot activities. As well, we are planning to further work on exploration possibilities to store CO2 in the Czech Republic directly. And then, of course, we will cooperate on potential schemes, how to fund individual projects.
Thank you for that overview, Pavel. Yanis, do you think we are on track, given that we have some countries now developing strategies, and we can see these large amounts of volumes being projected that we will need for CCS in the region? But do you think we're on track? And if not, what are some of the things holding us up?
Yeah, there are several important aspects that need to be taken into consideration to meet those targets. And just to make it concise, I would say three: the price that your report covers, and then the national regulations and public perception. I would list as a three top aspects to consider. And if we talk about the price, then I can only kind of take the conclusions from the report. As shorter the supply chains, the lower price for CCS deployment. And I can give you an excellent example from Latvia. If CO2 storage will be allowed onshore in Latvia, then from cement plant to permanent storage place, distance would be like a 10-20 kilometers. 10-20 kilometers. If we ship it to North Sea, it's 1,500 kilometers. So it's basically no-brainer that the price and competitiveness is completely different. And if the number given in the report you presented earlier, that transportation makes 40% of the whole CCS price, then it's easy to calculate what are the advantage or disadvantage for companies in CE comparing to those who are much closer to the map you showed, where the North Sea is with all the current storage locations. And while we are talking, I also wanted to take opportunity to say that tomorrow Latvian Parliament is about to vote that onshore storage will be allowed in Latvia. It's a big game changer for local industry, specifically cement. We closely follow this process, and then basically the major part from regulations will be kind of if the ban for CO2 storage is lifted, that is already one substantial step forward. And then we will continue work on public perception so that even local society and everyone is well aware what CO2 as a gas is and what are the risks, advantages, opportunities, etc.
Some good news there, Yanis. Thanks for sharing that. So that's definitely part of the needed picture to, I suppose, legalize CO2 storage is obviously very important. But for project developers and industry, so for you, Agnieszka, how do you see kind of the development of low carbon products, the markets for those? Because once you've put in place these CCS systems, obviously there's a need to sell those products into a market that needs them. Do you see the development of this market influencing project decisions for projects?
Definitely, and I believe that what's the most important is the market that we could trust, meaning that there would be a market and clients for these low carbon products, which probably might be more expensive than other products. And in order to achieve it and to have the market as a complementary decarbonization tool, we need green procurement and support from the public investor to the green products. And together with that, with the regulation regarding green products or CO2 in buildings emissions, that might support the development of the market and the need for the green products. So I will really advocate for green procurement, and hopefully in all countries it will be possible in the near future. In Poland, we already started a cooperation with the procurement authority to support them with a description, the technical description for green products, which might be included in public tenders. So hopefully that is a small first step towards this market.
Thank you very much. It's definitely an important aspect. I think it's something we'll see develop more and more. My final question then, before we go to the Q&A, is to you, Merit, and it's just about what kind of conditions do you think need to be in place for multilateral banks such as EBRD to really scale up financing in the region?
Yes, we see several enabling conditions. First of all, a robust regulatory framework is fundamental. What that means is, first of all, transposition of EU CCS directive and clear and predictable permitting and monitoring procedures, and transparent rules for long-term liability. And here it is important to point out that MDBs like EBRD need to be engaged, as I also mentioned before, at the early stages of the projects, not just as financiers, but as partners to the governments, partners to the early movers, to help to shape and deliver the required reforms. Second, we need predictable market signals. Strong and stable EU ETS price is the foundation, but that alone isn't enough. We also need national support schemes like carbon contracts for difference, which can guarantee the revenue certainty, and at the same time, market acceptance of green premium for products like low carbon cement, low carbon steel, as mentioned before. These will be crucial to create reliable revenue streams for the industries to make these investments. And third, we have to move forward with infrastructure and regional planning. CCS transport and storage infrastructure should be integrated into national energy and climate plans. And we believe EU support through instruments like CEF needs to be scaled up significantly and should be more inclusive, especially to fund cross-border hubs and networks, because these projects will not succeed within national borders alone. And also there is the issue of demand certainty. National and regional decarbonization roadmaps need to identify the role of CCS in hard-to-abate sectors and provide visibility for the main emitters who can develop those first projects. And those roadmaps have to be reinforced by transparent and investable business models along the CCS chain. And finally, we shouldn't forget about the public acceptance, because CCS cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be integrated into just transition strategies and wider industrial decarbonization pathways. That requires an open stakeholder engagement and clear communication of the role CCS can play in achieving climate targets. So in practice, EBRD looks for these enabling conditions alongside with credible project sponsors and alignment with national climate targets. And where the policy frameworks are incomplete, we don't just wait. We typically start with the policy dialogue and technical cooperation to help the early movers and governments to close these gaps. And we try to put the right condition in place before scaling up financing.
Thank you. There's clearly a lot to be done on the policy side, but it's good to hear that you guys are also involved in that as well. And I suppose the flag as well, we will also be having a publication on public acceptance, which is also very important, and public perception with AGH University Krakow in Poland. So we look forward to getting that out there and getting all your takes on that publication. So now it'd be good to move to the Q&A, and there's quite a few questions here, especially through the webinar chat itself. One of which is from the Romanian Regulatory Authority for Carbon Capture and Storage, and just more of a statement really, but just reflecting that they are willing and ready to collaborate with other institutions in Central and Eastern Europe for developing common projects, as well as transboundary CO2 transport strategies, and really highlighting there that Romania has a huge storage potential, which is something as well that we have found. I suppose that the first question I will take myself is on the CCS projects, whether or not they have been done without funding, and why they may have not succeeded in the past. What we have seen is we did a report, and we'll put this in the chat, carbon capture and storage, what can we learn from the project track record? And we investigate a lot of these large scale CCS projects. What we found is that there are many projects that are doing CCS without funding. Those are mostly in the United States, and they're doing it for enhanced oil recovery. So CCS has been around for a long time. In fact, carbon is captured and transported and stored, not just for climate purposes, but for the actual kind of operation of industrial facilities for quite some time. Now we have a new use for CCS, which is to use it for climate purposes and not to, say, produce more oil out of the ground. So this is why we do need now policies in place, because it's not so much a product that's being created by doing CCS. It is more of a pollution control technology. So hopefully that answers that question there. And the next question I have here is for Pavel. And it's a question as to how many officials in the Czech Republic are currently working on the CCS strategy. And is there any good practices did you apply in developing the CCS strategy? Did you have industry help?
Okay, I can react immediately on the question, and thanks for the question. Currently, say we share the task on implementation of the strategy in the Czech Republic. So in my department, I have one colleague who coordinates all the work, but we cooperate as well with colleagues from the decarbonization department here at the ministry, and with colleagues, I think 2 or 3 from the Ministry of Industry and Trade, because they are responsible especially for energy and industrial policy. But let's say the platform, roughly there are between 15 and 20 experts from different sectors. I mentioned academia, I mentioned maybe NGOs are as well there, geological survey, industrial sectors, industrial companies included, let's say Net4Gas as well. There is a member as a gas grid company. So it's really interesting that a lot of different stakeholders have been involved, and we cooperate quite actively across different fields and inform each other. As well, the stakeholders from chemical industry, they created their own group, which is called Czech Solution CO2 Group, and they are as well quite active in cooperation with academia, especially in research of different projects on utilization of CO2 and other different areas. So I would say that the stakeholders here are quite active and interested in exploring possibilities how to cooperate.
Thank you, Pavel. We've quite a few questions, so I'm just trying to pick one out here. It's great to see this level of engagement. Yes, so I think maybe I'll put this to you, Yanis, but if anyone else wants to come in as well after, feel free. So considering that CCS deployment in Eastern Europe is still at an early stage, what do you see as the most immediate policy or financing measures to accelerate CO2 transport and storage infrastructure in the region?
As I mentioned, first thing is just to wake up and lift the ban for CO2 storage. I mean, it's just absurd that we can store natural gas that has much higher risk degree in case of leakage and so on, but CO2 storage is still banned in most of the CE countries. So that is a first measure that needs to be taken. And then there are multiple other regulations that need to be taken place, how the storage allocation is operated, and all other regulations in line with CCS directive. But as I said, first thing is to lift the ban for CO2 storage nationally, and then there will be market players that will also be interested to accelerate the process.
Thank you. Good overview there. And there's a bit of a longer question here which I think applies to you there, Marich, on EBRD support. But I'll summarize it just to say that there are issues in the legal requirement for all documentation to be in a national language. And they say that that is a barrier for public procurement when they're trying to get public procurement. So they are wondering whether or not such projects could be exempted from standard public procurement procedures, particularly when EU level funding and strategic alignment are involved. And the question asker makes the case for a unified, more flexible EU-wide approach, and whether or not that could help accelerate implementation and attract the best qualified expertise.
Okay, the mentioned obstacle is here the national procurement requirements. So especially the obligation to prepare all documentation in local language, as I understand. So yes, we agree with that. This creates barriers for international experts and delay strategic initiatives. And we definitely agree with this comment. A more flexible EU-wide approach or targeted exemptions could accelerate implementation and ensure access to the best expertise, but this is not on our hands, of course, right now.
Of course. And we have 2 minutes left, so we'll try to fit one more question in. And sorry to all of those that we haven't been able to get to, but so this to you, Agnieszka, given that there's substantial funding needed for these CCS projects, how can you see that some of these regulatory frameworks and funding instruments can be improved to make them more effective and less bureaucratic in a way?
First of all, we need the framework, the legal framework. As I mentioned during my first entry, we need localization regulation, and also we need a special regulation on transportation, because we found that we are already delayed in delivering the targets for Poland. So first of all, the regulation, and second of all, the regulation which is not bureaucratic, as you mentioned, and which will be able to speed up the whole process to meet the targets which are set up for the countries and for the companies as well.
Great, thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. I would just like to thank everyone for their time today. And I know that within the chat there is some back and forth between some of the panelists, and it's great to see so many representatives here from different member states. So again, just thank you to all of the participants and attendees, and we'll be sharing as well the slides from today's webinar, as well as our policy brief funding CCS in Central and Eastern Europe in an email afterwards. So again, thank you all very much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.